The head of the snake is the financial system.
Europe will not survive.
Today I was watching this video, and the guy was answering some questions. One was concerned about the loss of liberties in an authoritarian fascist state. And this inspired me to talk about a noteworthy cultural difference I have noticed by listening to the Anglosphere for the last couple years. The traditional German idea about liberties and freedom seems to be fundamentally different from the Anglo-Saxon concept. The Anglo-Saxon concept is very much shaped by these two utopists and evolves pretty much around the idea of natural rights every human individual has. Of course, they acknowledge the nasty little contradiction called reality. They know there is no such thing as evidence in the real world to substantiate the claim of natural rights for individuals. Instead, there is plenty of evidence in the real world. This could more likely be a Darwinistic scenario. In their peril, they attribute the natural rights to the imaginary will of a desert deity, which is precisely the reason why I call them utopists and not philosophers. This is still the approach most Anglo-Saxons use today to think about liberties and freedom. God-given rights to do whatever you like and pursue happiness in doing so. The traditional German approach is fundamentally different. It begins with the question, do humans really like and want freedom? There are many problems with this claim. The first thing I have for you is a citation from a young boy. He was a minor, maybe around 14 years old, living homeless in the streets of Berlin. It might have been in the late 80s or early 90s, I don't recall. He had a conversation with the journalist, and when the topic of freedom came up, he said, "You know, freedom is a bit like running. You get tired at some point." Very true. And this is a nice caption of the German attitude towards freedom and liberties. Another citation comes from Janis Joplin. She sang, "Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose." There's also deep truth in this. But it doesn't end there. Responsibility and accountability come also in your way. Imagine you had the power to change your environment at will and you are completely unrestricted. You are as free as possible. In this case, 100% of all responsibility ends up on your shoulders. You could hardly blame someone else for any undesired outcome, could you? For most people, this feels like a burden. Feminists struggle with their entire career, which is why they invent ever more hypocritical excuses in their futile attempt to eat the cake and have the cake, always trying to get the benefits without the responsibilities. Another problem is the process of decision-making itself. If you challenge humans with an overload of options, many struggle to make a decision at all. If you ever went out to buy furniture or shoes with a woman, you probably know what I'm talking about. The next problem is the potential workload of real freedom and liberty. An old German saying goes, "If you want it done correctly, do it yourself." That's also very true. If you want 100% control over the outcome, you would have to do everything yourself or use slaves and servants exclusively. You could never accept the help of a free man because the free decisions he would make would infringe on your control over the outcome and therefore limit your freedom in some way. And finally, on a philosophical level, there is this little problem with nature and the human as a part of nature. In order to be really free and liberated, it is necessary to ascend. You would have to free yourself from the boundaries and rise above your own nature and the nature of your environment. That's impossible unless you believe in nonsense like transhumanism. This very idea is also one of the reasons why the teachings of the desert deity are such a poison. The desert deity wants you to believe just this, the possibility to rise above nature and become something else, something unbound. Clearly this is not going to happen in this life, and if you live this life with a premise like this, you are set up for failure, at last here on Earth, which is, as far as I'm concerned, precisely what happens today to our civilization of the lie. So, do humans really like and want and enjoy liberty and freedom? The traditional German way to see it says, no, they don't. Freedom and liberty are the type of concept which looks good on paper but sucks in reality, like communism. Like all utopist visions. In reality, humans like security, a predictable environment and comfort. And they tend to choose this over freedom and liberty if forced to pick a side. They only pretend to desire freedom and liberty when it means they can get away with awful behavior, when it means to be free from consequences. That's when humans love to call it freedom or liberty. I admit the utopists like Locke and Adams didn't want it to mean freedom from consequences. But I think they should have seen this coming. Only if you are in deep denial of human nature, you wouldn't see this coming. In retrospect, we can now safely assert that's the pure outcome of liberalism. American-style personal freedom and liberties, as inspired by the British utopists, have always exclusively been used when it meant to avoid consequences and kick the can down the road. Thanks to cheap oil and efficient technology, liberals were able to kick the can so far down the road so they themselves would never have to deal with the consequences at all. Instead, their children and grandchildren are blessed with this burden. So, I'm almost at the end. One little point is missing. What is the traditional German concept of freedom and liberty then? Most traditional Germans would associate this with self-sufficiency and autonomy. They would argue there is no such thing as real liberty and freedom in this world. You will always be bound to the limitations of your human condition. If you are self-sufficient with a high level of autonomy, that's as close as you can get in this life. If you have a little village of 3,000 people, let's say, and they have their own little power plant for electricity, a facility to produce fresh water, a little bank, a little communications company, their animals and the agriculture, a grocery store and a dentist. Those villagers could survive even if the civilization around them burns down. This was the strategy reflected in rural Germany when I grew up. Unfortunately, it's not like this anymore. Many rural parts of Germany are wastelands by now. But that's probably the most common idea traditional Germans would have about freedom and liberty. Together with privacy. Data security in Germany does not mean protection against fire and water damage. Germans talk about the right to keep your data private when they use the word. Anglo-Saxons tend to say freedom of speech is the mother of all rights. Okay, I agree. I would like to add, privacy is the father of all rights, and you need them both. So, that's about it for today. Thank you for your patience, and be well wherever you are.